Hello and welcome to my studio. In this video I'm going to show you how I made this image. This image was created almost entirely in camera and can be lit with daylight. Originally I was going to shoot this video outside using daylight. However, the British weather has not cooperated, so I have set up a simulation of daylight in the studio. Okay, so let me show you what I've got set up so far. But first of all, I'll have to turn out the house lights. Now with the house lights out, you should be able to see that I've set this rather large LED lamp quite a way away. This is going to simulate the sunshine. I've set this at about 40 degrees, which is the elevation that you will get in the UK at midday at this time of the year. So it's the equivalent of a bright sunny day. And that's the whole point of this video really. What I'm trying to do is create sunshine in the studio so that you can see how you can do this sort of thing outside. I'm sure at some point in the future I should be able to do the whole thing for real outside when the weather gets a bit better. Okay, so this is the subject that I'm using for this video. This is a simulation of some vegetation outside. So I've got an old branch here and then I've got a pot plant for the main subject. Then coming a bit further forward on the camera I have a 24-70 zoom lens, and the camera itself is tethered into Capture One software. Now I'm tethering it into this software so that it's easy to show the results, but you can do all of this just with the screen on the back of the camera. Okay, so initially then what I'm going to do is just take a test image just to see what the exposure is. Okay, so there we can see our initial image, and the settings that I had for that was a shutter speed of 1/50th of a second at f8 at 100 ISO. Now if you were really outside, this would be slightly different. I'm sure the shutter speed would probably need to be a little higher. But it's a good approximation for what we're doing in here. So at the moment the lens is set to 24mm, and I'm just going to just compose the image in the viewfinder of the camera. So I'm just going to zoom that in a bit, something like that, and just check the focus point. So with that recomposed, I'll just take another image. Okay, this isn't looking too bad. We'll just zoom in and have a look and see what the focus looks like. That looks pretty good. Okay. So at first sight, this looks reasonable. It's a reasonable exposure, relatively sharp, but doesn't look at all like the original image that I showed at the beginning of the video. And that's partly due to the way that this is lit. So as I said earlier, what I've done in the studio here is to simulate daylight. And I've simulated daylight at midday on a clear sky, so no cloud. Therefore, you end up with very hard shadows, like you can see in the image. So if you don't want hard shadows, what you can do is use one of these just to soften the daylight a little. If I just place this here, you should be able to see the difference that makes. So that's with it, and that's without it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set this on a stand about here somewhere, just so it's softening the light. Now if again you were doing this outside, you'd probably find something just to lean this on, so you wouldn't need a stand. But here in the studio, it's going to be easier for me just to put that on a stand. There, so that's the diffuser in place. So I'll just take a test image. We'll probably need to adjust the exposure because this will take out some of the energy from the system. Yes, and you can see from that, not only is it very much softer than the previous image, that was the previous image, but it's also about a stop down. So if I just increase the exposure by 1 stop, so instead of a 50th of a second, I'll go to 1/25th of a second. There we are. So that's brought it back again. So that's what we had without the diffuser. And this is what we've got with the diffuser. And this is altogether quite a lot softer. The harsh shadows have all but disappeared. So with the diffuser in place, the lighting from our simulated daylight is all but set. So the next thing to think about is how the image got to look the way it does. Now, the overall softness and dreamlike quality that you can see is caused by intentional camera movement. Now, one of the things about intentional camera movement is that you do need some time to be able to manipulate the camera. So, for instance, if I tried to do some intentional camera movement with the settings that I've got, by the time I trigger the camera, the image has been taken. And as you can see, you don't get a very good result at all. It just looks like camera shake. So what you need to do is to be able to drop the shutter speed considerably. And one way you can do that is by using one of these. This is an ND or neutral density filter, and this is a 10-stop neutral density filter. And this just screws to the front of the lens. But do be aware that something like this is very dark, so you're going to have to set your shot up first, then screw it onto the lens. Otherwise you won't be able to see anything through the viewfinder. So with that in place, I'll just adjust the shutter speed. Now again, I'm just guessing at the exposure to start with, but I'm going to take it down to say 1 second, and we'll just see what that looks like. So even at 1 second, this is still not bright enough. So let's just take that to 5 seconds. Now that's starting to get there. I don't really want to go much more than 5 seconds because we're starting to get some noise in the image and we're getting a few pixel effects. There's one there, for instance. If I just zoom in, you should be able to see that there's a bright blue spot there. That's a function of having a fairly long open shutter. So if I were to, for instance, double this to 10 seconds, there is even more noise in the image. You can probably just spot this red one that's in the middle here. I just zoom in. So going too long will increase the noise within your image. So I'm just going to take this back down to 5 seconds, but I'm going to adjust the ISO. Instead of having it at 100, I'll just try it at 200. Just give that a go. So setting the exposure is a matter of compromise between having a shutter speed which is, one, long enough so you can do some intentional camera movement, we'll come to that in a moment, but two, not make it too long so that the image gets very noisy. So again, you can just adjust the ISO and possibly the aperture. In fact, I might take the aperture and just take that from f8 down to f4. There we are, that's better. With these settings, we are getting a good exposure and the focus seems to be in the right place. Let me just check that. Yep, that's pretty good. So with those bits set, now it's time to try a bit of intentional camera movement. So what I'm going to do is just release the camera from the top of the tripod, like this. Then I'll activate the shutter, move the camera a bit and put it back. So there goes the camera, and back on the stand, and there we go. And now you can see the effects that we're starting to create. So the trick with this is to just make sure that you have a tripod head which is capable of having some form of snap connection between your camera and the head itself. So as I put this down, you should be able to see that that will then lock into place. Having this facility makes it easier to finalize the image. The longer that the camera is pointing in the same direction without you moving it with the shutter open, the stronger that part of the image will be. So for instance, if I take that off, open the shutter and just hold it manually and wobble it about a bit on purpose, there will be nothing sharp in the final image, as you can see. So what you actually need to do is to take the camera off, and then with the camera moving, open the shutter and then place the camera back on the tripod before the shutter closes. There, that's the sort of thing. And by doing that, you end up with a bit of both worlds. You end up with a bit of this one and a bit of this one, and end up with this sort of thing. Now the results of doing this are quite random, so it's just a case of repeating the same procedure a few times until you get an image that you're happy with. So we just take it off the top of the tripod, start moving the camera, open the shutter, place the camera back down before the shutter finishes, like that, and just keep going until you get a good image. So once you've captured an image that you're happy with, such as this one, the next thing to do is just to capture an image without moving it at all. So we'll just take another one, like that, which we can use as a background. You might need this in post-production. Okay, so with those images captured, it's just time to go to Photoshop and do very minimal post-production on this image. Okay, so here we are in Photoshop. Now I've selected this particular image and also this one, which was the last one that I took without any camera movement on it at all. So we've just got this one in case we need it, really. But just from an artistic point of view, there are some elements of this one which do stand on their own. For instance, if I just put a crop, very tight crop, around one of the particular elements in the picture, I think this can make quite a nice image all on its own without doing anything else to it, really. Something like that. Has a certain dreamlike quality to it. But if you want to go a little bit further, I just get rid of that crop, like so. One of the things that you can do is actually combine the two images, this one and this one. So an easy way to do that would be to go to File, come down to Scripts, load files into Stack, and just ask Photoshop to add the open files, like so. And what that will do is make a different layer for each of the images. So that's our background image, and that's the foreground image. So with the foreground image selected, just add a layer mask to that. And what I'm going to do is just paint through some of the underlying detail. So just make sure that black is selected as a foreground colour. Grab a paintbrush, just change the size of that a bit. There we are, keep it fairly soft. And what I'm just going to do is just go over this part of the plant just to make it a little sharper, like so. And the stem too. And I'll do the same on this bit over here. I'm doing this fairly quickly. You could take a bit more time, but you get the idea. And then I'll probably do the same to this part of the branch in the middle here, just to give a bit of contrast to the image. There we are, like so. And it gives it a bit of depth just in this area, which I think has worked quite well. And now if we go for a crop, I'm going to choose a ratio of 16:9 because it fits the videos, but you just need to pick something which complements the subject really. And then by holding down the Alt key and grabbing one of the corners, it will actually crop from the center. Like so. I'm taking this in quite tight. Like that. Let's click on OK. And I think that's made a very pleasing image. It's a little different, so this is something that you can do outside with daylight. You don't need flash, you don't need continuous lighting. This is well within the scope of most photographers. Okay, well I hope you've enjoyed seeing how I made that image, and if you like watching these sort of things, do click on the other images as they appear, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you very much for watching.